All right, so continuing in our civilian resistance operations concept here, we talked previously about our heavies. What does that look like? Our, heavy squad weapons. And so in today's video, we're going to talk about what do our light squad weapons look like. One of the things that I want to point out in the 7.62 video, whether that's precision fire or area fire with something like a Magpul D50 mag, is that I did mention that AR-10s are not uniform across manufacturers. And because of that, even if your AR-10 will take an AR-15 style drop-in trigger, that doesn't mean that giggle switches will work necessarily. Ask me how I know. However, there's a benefit to the LSW light squad weapon here, AR-15 platform, in that in many cases, most cases, giggle switches do work. And so we talked about with the heavies, our ability to replicate machine gun fires as a civilian is basically non-existent. We don't have heavy barrels, we don't have interchangeable barrels, we don't have the logistical support for half a dozen 200-round belts or a dozen 200-round belts to feed the pig, right? But when we get into 5.56 or 7.62 short calibers here, we do have the ability to make use of giggle switches. So in no particular order here, we're going to look at a 5.56 version and we're going to look at a 7.62 by 39 version. Now these are, again, poverty tier weapons, and I'm good with it because I like functionality over form. I think there are definitely weapons and components that one should spend money on. I mean, I sell the best first aid kits on planet Earth, and they're not cheap, and I get it. And I've got, Bravo Company weapons, and I've got some nice stuff. I also have a bunch of stuff that's relatively inexpensive that I beat the shit out of on the regular, and it continues to work. And so there's a value there that for many of us, most of us, we can attain capability without having to take out a second or third mortgage or sell our firstborn, okay? I'm not poor, but I'm not rich either. I'm on a budget just like everybody else. So this here is a, I think is it Bear Arms? The lower is Palmetto, Bear Creek, that's right. And Bear Creek actually sent me this upper for testing a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And Bear Creek Arsenal, that's right. And the first upper that they sent, I could not get better than 10 MOA out of it. It was just trash. And so I wrote to them, I said, hey, this thing's trash. I'm making a review to let you know, or let everybody else know as well. I said, thanks for the feedback. Send us that one back. We'll do warranty work on it. In the meanwhile, here's another one. So then they sent me this one. And this upper, 20-inch, mid-heavy profile barrel, this upper is a 1 MOA upper with good factory ammunition. So huge improvement. So sample size of 2, the first one was 10 MOA, the second one is 1 MOA. Phenomenal. And I've got videos on testing that from back in the day. It has this side charging handle here versus the rear charging handle that you typically have on an AR-15. So one has to get used to that to charge the weapon here. It also doesn't have a forward assist. But since I had this upper anyway, and I had this lower laying around, and I may or may not have had a giggle switch depending on what day it is that you're watching this, because I mean, it's entirely possible that it got lost or stolen. I think it was stolen. That's what happened to it. I put this together. Nothing special. Little Magpul stock, little Magpul bipod, Magpul D60 drum, which these have been very reliable in my experience. Make sure your weapon is appropriately lubricated, right? And if I put all these things together, I then get a light squad giggle switch weapon, LSGW. All right. It's not a full auto. It's not belt fed. By the way, this is an Olight weapons light, and I hate it. Here's what I hate about it. It's not the functionality. It's not the proprietary battery. It's not that. It's this. This quick connect cap moves in the wrong direction. So what can happen, and often does happen, is something will brush past this, pull this cap back, which unlocks it, and then pulls it off. Now, there's also a thumb switch underneath it here to activate the light, rather than this pressure switch here, if you wanted to go with that. And it's got this little magnetic lockup like Olight is famous for. But this should lock in the other direction, because as you're moving past stuff, stuff can grab that cap and just pull it right off like that. Dirt, debris, mud, sand, anything else can get in there and wreck that. And so what I should do is take a roll of electrical tape and electrical tape over the top of that to keep that from happening. But I digress. So setup here is very basic. Got an optic, a way to aim the weapon. Got a weapons light, which is, again, poverty tier. Do I have surefires on my go-to weapons? 100%. Not all my weapons are my go-to weapons. A lot of this stuff is handout, equipping the squad, equipping the brothers, or Met TC, right? It's mission dependent. Again, the caveat, I've neither been there nor done that. I just hang around a bunch of guys that have. So weapons light, way to aim it, and a sling. That's it. And this is significantly lighter. Probably in the range with this 60 round drum mag, which is much smaller than the 50 round 7.62 magazine. About 9 pounds right here. Very manageable. A lot of people have 9-pound fighting rifles because they've got 100 different things strapped to it that they don't need to have on it. Very manageable, but also controllable without a muzzle brake, just a regular, A2 bird cage on the end of it. The only idiosyncrasy with this particular weapon is the side charging here. That's just something that you got to get used to. And it does not lock to the rear. Okay, so that's just something you got to get used to. That's it. This affords us a lot of capability for suppressive fire, covering fire at the squad level. Okay, because I can feed these, we can all feed these with the ammunition that we're already carrying, with 5.56 NATO, 30 round box magazines of whatever flavor. If you're a Hex Mag guy, a Lancer Mag guy, you're no, I only use USGI mags. Okay, cool. Nope, perfectly comfortable with Magpul. Whatever you're into, we can stick all kinds of different magazines in here and continue to do what needs to get done until we don't have to do it anymore. What we don't have here is a whole lot of effective range. Again, about 500 meters on a point target, 800 meters on an area target. We don't have a whole lot of effective range, and we don't have a whole lot of force. So we don't have light barrier defeating capabilities, unless, 62 grain, maybe. We don't necessarily have a whole lot of accuracy, even if this is a 1 MOA barrel and upper, which it is in testing. Holding 1 MOA with a giggle switch, not going to happen. And that's okay, because we want some dispersion, we want some beatings, and we want to scatter that around a little bit. So we don't have a ton of stopping power. We don't have a ton of effective range, but we have a ton of cross compatibility with everybody else who's in the squad. Everybody can keep this thing fed. And for the size of one Magpul D60 mag or D50 mag in 7.62 NATO, the same passive will hold that one D50 mag in 7.62 NATO. It's holding 50 rounds of 7.62. I can stick 5 or 6 of these 30 round 5.56 magazines in there. We'll just call it 5. So I go from 50 to 150. That's 3 times the ammunition. And we're all already carrying these, or at least we're all asterisk already carrying these. I'll get there in a moment. I see you, Zach. I know you're watching, Zach. I got something for you. Okay. So this is quite attainable. Again, poverty tier. All right. We got a $400 upper, $150 lower, a $200 optic, primary arms, 5X prismatic optic here. Again, same optic that I showed you on the 7.62 weapon. Okay, so I'm 350, 750 sling. You know, this sling is an SOE sling. They're not cheap. They're excellent though. Shout out to John and Amanda at SOE Tactical Gear. I'm $1,000 including everything seen here. $1,000 into this thing. Okay, and it works, and it's kept working, and that's one of the things. Again, I was skeptical about Bear Creek. I was, you know, I have showed you Palmetto weapons on camera that did not work. Even though I support Palmetto and what they're about, I like what they're about. But I have, man, I bought 3 Palmetto daggers, Gen 1s, just for testing and evaluation. 2 of them did not function out of the box. And I showed you guys all of that. It's got to be this. It's got to be that. No, it's the magazines. No, you're limp wristing it, Barrett. Sure. I'm limp wristing. Got it. No, send them back to Palmetto. They fixed them. It was the feed ramps on the barrels that were the problem. And to their credit, they fixed them. And I showed you guys that too. So I like their customer service. I like that they stand behind their product. I also readily admit there's far better manufacturers out there. But as far as pressing capability into service amongst the general population from a civilian resistance operations standpoint, it's hard to beat Palmetto. Okay. And so this weapon here gives us a lot of firepower, organic to the squad level, that can cause people to put their heads down so that we can move. Okay. And I can feed it with 60 round magazines. I can feed it with 30 round magazines. It's light, it's controllable. If you're into this, you can put whatever length barrel you want on here. Currently has a 20 on it. And I know from a maneuverability standpoint, that can be a deal breaker. But from a ballistic standpoint, it's great. From a controllability and signature standpoint, that's great. And it's still 9 pounds with 60 rounds on it with a 20-inch magazine. Very lightweight, very capable. So we'll move on to that. I got something special here for our brother Zach. Who's Zach? An American Homestead. Go follow them. Brother, friend, all around good guy. This is a PSAC. What's a PSAC? Palmetto State Armory AK. I have 2 of these. I've shown you these on camera. All right. So now we're getting out of the 5.56 and into 7.62 by 39 millimeter AK-47 round. On paper, this round, 7.62 short, and this round, 5.56 by 45 millimeter, are almost identical on paper. However, when I shoot, for example, steel targets with 5.56, it ping, 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 to ting, 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 no problem. When I shoot steel targets with 7.62 short, clang, 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 it will shake the targets off of the target holders at a close enough range. So while on paper, they have very similar external ballistics and experience, effects on target, that 7.62 short hits harder. It just hits hard. And I'm not a fan of it from a logistical standpoint. What do I mean by that? These magazines are larger. They're heavier. Used to be, this ammunition, this 7.62 by 39, used to be readily available, incredibly cheap. It's not anymore. I bought thousands and thousands of rounds of this stuff when it was cheap. I mean, 149 bucks for 1,000 rounds with steel cased Tulamo and Wolf and Bear ammo, all that stuff, right? Steel cased. This stuff will rust on you, especially here in Oklahoma where it's humid year round. Doesn't matter what the season is. I don't know how many times I've said it, but I don't live in a desert. I live in a jungle. I'm in a river valley here, and it stays humid year round, including winter. And so this ammunition will rust on you, which will affect its reliability and functionality in the weapons platform. So that's a logistical challenge for me. This is also a logistical challenge because unless your entire squad is running 7.62 short, we now again are back to carrying special ammunition. And for what capability? Well, this defeats light barriers better than this 5.56 does. Now, I'll tell you, again, going back to live flesh, this 5.56 ballistic tip is far more devastating on live flesh than this 7.62 FMJ is. But they make 7.62 ballistic tips. They make specialty rounds for 7.62 as well. But the cost comparison between the two now, 7.62 by 39 is no longer just dumb cheap. It's not anymore. So if you already have a surplus of it, a stockpile of it, great. If you don't, just understand you're going to be spending as much for 7.62 short as you are for 5.56 NATO, okay? But I'm now back to carrying a specialty ammunition for a specialty weapon. So there is a downside logistically there. And these magazines, about 1.5 pounds for a 30-round magazine of 7.62 short, about 1 pound for a 30-round magazine of 5.56 NATO. So weight penalty again, size and weight constraints penalties here. But there is something to the chunka of this thing. Now, depending on which 7.62 platform you have, some of them also will take AR-15 trigger groups, aka giggle switches. That's something to think about. These can also be fed with steel or polymer 30-round box magazines or drums. Now, the drums, which drums you get, matter. It seems like about 50% of the drums that I have bought for AKs don't work. I've followed all the instructions, I've spoken to the experts, I've watched the videos, they just don't work. I don't know if they sat around too long and the springs are bad or what, but they just don't work. And they're not inexpensive. They're not quite as expensive as buying Magpul polymer drum mags. But your, Soviet era steel 75 round drum magazines, they're heavy, they're bulky. So again, size and weight constraint penalties here. And functionality wise, they just don't work. And if you follow Ian over at Forgotten Weapons, which I imagine most of you all do, he's done quite a bit of content about the efficacy of drum mags versus stick mags and how most nations that have adopted drum mags always end up replacing those drum mags with stick magazines from simply a reliability standpoint. Double stack, double feed stick mags just work way more reliably than drum magazines do. So while I have many drum magazines for the AKs, and I like the drum magazine for the AK, that sucker's heavy, they're not inexpensive, have functionality problems with them more often than not. They rattle, they make a lot of noise inside of there, which is always a consideration. So much so that I'm noticing on these weapons some areas I got to hit with spray paint to take this shine down on some of these things here. They make noise, so they have a signature there as well. But they do have the benefit of firepower. And we get that benefit of firepower and that force on target with the penalty of size and weight. Again, these magazines are larger, they're heavier, they're a little bit more complex to carry than our standard M4, M16 magazines are. But, and this gun is heavier than that gun. This is probably, oh my gosh, Ziga at Polinar Tactical screaming at me right now. There we go. Time to go back to the range with an AK. This gun is easily in the range of 10 pounds, maybe 10.5 pounds. And it doesn't have a ton of gewgaws on it. I've got a primary arms 3X prism on it, box magazine, weapons light, and bipod. Why bipod on all these? To be able to run this in the prone if needed from a support standpoint. That's why. Can I do magazine monopod? Yes, but the gun, the faster we shoot, the more the gun's going to jump around. And so if I can load into this on the bipod and then go to work, great. That's why bipod. It gives us a more stable shooting platform. And there's a whole bunch of schools of thought about where the bipod should be located. The further forward you move the bipod, the more stable your shooting position will be, but the less traverse that you will have, which is just a physics thing. The further back you move the tripod, the less stable your shooting platform will be because you have shorter distance in between the shooter and the bipod, but the more traverse you will get as you move. If I pivot the gun here, I get all that traverse right there. Versus if I pivot the gun here, see the difference in traverse? So the further you move the bipod towards the muzzle, the more stable the shooting position becomes because I have a greater distance in between the bipod and the shooter, but I limit the range of traverse. I have to physically move my body more to get the same amount of traverse versus moving the bipod closer, the pivot point closer. Now the pivot point's closer to the shooter, so I have a less stable shooting platform because there's a shorter distance in between the bipod and the shooter. But as I move the back of the gun around, I get much more traverse without necessarily having to reposition. And these little bipod magazine or Magpul bipods rather, they have traverse built into the bipod as well. There's a little thumb screw under here you can tighten and loosen that will lock that up. Get that out of the way. If I loosen that up, there we go. It'll just traverse back and forth. If I tighten it up, it'll stay where I put it. So depending on what you're doing, you can adjust that however you see fit. But these all have bipods on them, taking the weight penalty on bipods for the stability that it creates in the prone that, God forbid, should we ever have to utilize these things, we have a stable firing position going back to accuracy. It's not just volume of fire, it's accurate, well-aimed fire on target. That's the primary thing that we can bring to bear from a civilian standpoint to help equalize the enemy's overmatch. Because again, we don't have belt-fed weapons. We don't have heavy weapons. But if we can have accurate, well-aimed fire, even with some volume to it, accurate, well-aimed fire, we can end the engagement as quickly as possible. That's important. Or get their heads down and run away. The shorter this duration, the better it's going to go for us. And again, we cannot bring fire superiority via belt feds and heavy weapons. So we have to be able to bring fire superiority via accuracy. So light squad giggle switch weapons, LSGWs, potentially AK, heavy, non-standard ammunition, capable. I love how hard it hits. There's a reason I have these. Okay, set up enough magnification that you can identify a target, but not so much magnification that you can't call your own shots. So that's a 3 power. Or my preference is something like this in 5.56 with whatever length barrel you want. You could reduce the length of this barrel by half. Go with a 10.5-inch barrel if you want. You're going to get a lot of blast, a lot of concussion, but you're going to reduce the weight. You're also going to get reduced ballistics, but you're going to reduce the weight, make it easier to carry, easier to move in and around vehicles with, easier to move inside of buildings with. And with this, I've got a 9-pound gun with 60 rounds on board and a giggle switch, or not a giggle switch, depending on when you're watching it, and cross compatibility with standard ammunition, standard magazines that everybody else is carrying this gun. So this is my preferred method here. Again, to be 100% clear, for the preservation of life. Otto C. Fiala, Resistance Operating Concept, read it. Civilian resistance operations. That's the point of this entire series, is for us to be adequately prepared for the coming unpleasantness that, God forbid, we have to do something to protect ourselves, our families, our loved ones, our churches, our nation. We're appropriately equipped and trained to be able to intervene for the preservation of life. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'll see y'all when I see you.